June 323 BC, Babylon. The most powerful man on the face of the earth is lying on his deathbed. He is 32 years old. In just 13 years of fighting, he has never once lost a battle, not one. He has conquered Greece, Egypt, Persia, Central Asia, and pushed his army all the way to the borders of India. He controls an empire stretching from the Adriatic Sea to the edge of the known world. And now he is dying in agony, in a foreign palace, unable to move, unable to speak, while his generals stand around his bed, waiting for him to breathe his last. When he finally dies, something even stranger happens. His body does not decompose. For 6 full days, in the blazing heat of a Babylonian summer, no decay. Nothing. His men were absolutely certain this proved what Alexander had always believed about himself. That he was not a man, that he was a god. And honestly, looking at what he accomplished in just 3 decades of life, it is very hard to argue with them. Welcome back. Today we are talking about the man that military commanders have studied and copied for over 2,000 years. A man who conquered more of the known world by age 30 than most empires achieve in centuries. A man who was personally tutored by the greatest philosopher who ever lived, and then went out and did things even Aristotle could not have imagined. This is the story of Alexander the Great, not the legend, not the myth. The real, complicated, brilliant, brutal, tragic human being who changed the shape of the world before the age most people are just starting their careers. Let's get into it. Alexander was born on July 20th, 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedonia, a kingdom in northern Greece that most other Greeks looked down upon as barbaric and backward. His father was Philip II of Macedon, one of the greatest military innovators in ancient history. Philip had transformed Macedonia from a weak, fragmented kingdom on the edge of collapse into the most dominant military power in the Greek world. He invented the Macedonian phalanx, a devastating infantry formation using 18-foot spears called sarissas, and used it to crush enemy after enemy. His mother was Olympias, a fierce, deeply spiritual woman from Epirus, who reportedly told Alexander from birth that his real father was not Philip at all, but the god Zeus himself. She raised him to believe he was divine, destined. From the very beginning, Alexander was being told, "You are not ordinary. You are not bound by ordinary rules." When he was 13, his father did something extraordinary. He hired the most famous thinker in the world to educate his son. That man was Aristotle. For 3 years, at a place called the Temple of the Nymphs at Mieza, Aristotle taught Alexander everything philosophy, logic, medicine, literature, ethics, science, and the art of rhetoric. Among his classmates were the boys who would later become his generals, Ptolemy, Hephaestion, Cassander. One story from this period captures everything about young Alexander. His old tutor, Leonidas, had once scolded him for throwing too much incense on a sacrificial fire, telling him to be more careful with expensive resources until he had conquered the lands where incense grew. Years later, after Alexander was master of Asia, he sent Leonidas 600 talents of incense, an almost incomprehensible quantity, with a note. He could now be less stingy in his offerings to the gods. Even as a teenager, Alexander played the long game. In 336 BC, when Alexander was just 20 years old, his father Philip II was assassinated at his own daughter's wedding celebrations, stabbed by one of his own bodyguards, a man named Pausanias. Alexander moved instantly. Within days, he had eliminated every potential rival to the throne. His cousin Amyntas was killed. His mother, Olympias, murdered Philip's last wife and her infant daughter. Alexander was ruthless and methodical. He had watched his father build an empire, and he had no intention of losing it to internal politics. By age 20, he was king of Macedonia. But ruling Macedonia was never going to be enough. In 334 BC, at age 22, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Persian territory with an army of roughly 37,000 men. He was going to war against the largest empire in the world, the Persian Achaemenid Empire, which stretched from Egypt to India and had a population of tens of millions. His own generals thought he was walking into his death. What happened next changed the world forever. To understand why Alexander never lost a battle, you need to understand one thing. He fought completely differently from everyone else. Every other army of his era relied on overwhelming numbers just to send more men than the enemy. Alexander used something far more sophisticated, a tactic now known as the hammer and anvil. His infantry phalanx, the anvil, would march forward and pin the enemy in place, holding them with those terrifying 18-foot sarissa spears. Then Alexander himself would lead the cavalry, the hammer, in a lightning-fast flanking charge directly at the enemy's command structure. Not attacking the mass of enemy soldiers, attacking the leadership, the generals, the king. Destroy the head, and the body collapses. At the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, this tactic shattered the Persian army of Darius III, who had a force estimated at more than twice Alexander's size. Darius fled the battlefield, abandoning his own family, his wife, his mother, his children in his camp. Alexander treated them with complete honor and respect. This was not mercy for its own sake. It was strategy. Word spread across the Persian Empire. Alexander was just. Then came the defining moment of his career. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, Darius had spent months rebuilding his army. Historians estimate he had anywhere from 100,000 to over 200,000 men. Alexander had 47,000. The night before the battle, one of Alexander's generals suggested a night attack to offset the Persian numerical advantage. Alexander refused. He would win in the daylight, in the open, so that no one could ever say victory had come by luck or trickery. He won. The hammer and anvil executed perfectly. The Persian Empire collapsed. Babylon, Persepolis, Susa all fell. Darius fled again and was later murdered by his own men. At 25 years old, Alexander was king of Persia. But Alexander did not stop. He pushed east into Central Asia, into modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan places even Persia had struggled to hold. He fought for years in brutal mountain terrain, surviving wounds that should have killed him multiple times, including an arrow to the lung in India that his doctor said was fatal. He survived. In 326 BC, he entered India with war elephants used against him for the first time. His army adapted and won again. But here, finally, Alexander met an enemy he could not defeat, his own men. After years of endless marching, thousands of miles from home, in a land they did not understand, facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever seen, his soldiers refused to go further. They sat down at the Hyphasis River in India and would not move. For the only time in his life, Alexander gave in. He turned back west, and the story of what happened next, the march back, the losses, the drinking, the paranoia, the death of his closest friend Hyphasis, is one of history's most haunting descents. Alexander had conquered the world. He just couldn't figure out what to do with himself once he had. In June 323 BC, Alexander arrived in Babylon, the city he planned to make the capital of his new world empire. He was planning his next campaign. Arabia was next. Then one evening, after a long night of drinking with a naval officer named Nearchus and his companion Medius of Larissa, he felt it. A stabbing pain in his back, a fever, a burning, unquenchable thirst. Over the following 12 days, his condition deteriorated catastrophically. The paralysis spread. He lost his ability to move, then his ability to speak. When his soldiers heard he was dying, thousands of them lined up outside the palace and demanded to see him. He could not speak, but he raised his hand, one by one, to each man who passed his bed. On June 10th, 323 BC, he was declared dead. He was 32 years old. And then came the strangest detail of all. His body did not decompose for 6 days. In the heat of a Babylonian summer, 6 days, ancient historians like Plutarch recorded it as proof of his divinity. Modern medical scholars have a different explanation. In 2018, Dr. Catherine Hall of the University of Otago proposed that Alexander may have had Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that causes full paralysis while the patient remains alive, but unable to show any signs of life. Her theory that Alexander was declared dead while still alive, his body preserved because he was still breathing, was described as potentially the most famous case of a false diagnosis of death in all of recorded history. To this day, we do not know for certain what killed him: typhoid fever, poison, Guillain-Barré syndrome. The debate is still open. What we do know is this: when Alexander died or was declared dead, his empire immediately collapsed. His generals tore it apart within months. No one else could hold it together because there was only ever one Alexander. Napoleon Bonaparte once stood in front of a portrait of Alexander the Great and wept. He said, "At my age, Alexander had already conquered the known world, and I have done nothing." Napoleon, the man who conquered most of Europe, wept because he felt he hadn't lived up to Alexander. That is the standard Alexander set. A boy who was told by his mother he was the son of Zeus, a student who sat at the feet of Aristotle, a soldier who never once lost a battle, a king who conquered everything and still wanted more. His body vanished. His tomb has never been found. His empire crumbled within a generation. But the world he made the blending of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian culture that historians call the Hellenistic Age shaped the next 3 centuries of human civilization and laid the intellectual groundwork for the Roman Empire, early Christianity, and the Islamic Golden Age. He died at 32, and the world has never fully recovered from his absence. If this video hit you, subscribe and leave a comment. Do you think Alexander could have conquered India if his men hadn't stopped him? See you in the next one.